Hello, I am your beloved host Ethan Nguyen, and today in this very special one-off production of Smash Course World History, we're going to be informing you, the lovely audience, about the technology of World War II.
Enjoy the video!
Now, since we're going to be talking about World War II, what exactly is World War II? Well, just by looking at the name, you can already tell that it was a war around the world. And it's the second one. Now, because there's a Second World War, that obviously means there was a First World War. So, let's start by going back to that one. Way back when in 1914, there was a massive war that ravaged Europe known as World War I. Pretty much all of the major European powers as well as America had a part in this war. We're not going to dive too deep into this, but it's important to know that Germany lost this war. They were forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which would impose heavy reparations and tons of other military and economic restrictions. A few years after the war in 1923, Germany was suffering from hyperinflation and massive amounts of unemployment. To pour a little salt on the wound, the global economic depression hit in 1930, crippling the entire world, which includes Germany. Things really sucked if you lived in Germany, and people were desperate for anything that could fix their country. In 1932, the Nazi Party, founded by none other than Adolf Hitler, who promised to bring an end to unemployment, which he did, and to right the wrongs that Germany suffered from the Treaty of Versailles, took a prominent position in the German government, having been voted into power by the many desperate people seeking drastic change, and then took full control over Germany in 1933. So, contrary to popular belief, Hitler did do some good things. However, you still can't change the fact that he was a totalitarian ruler who silenced his own people if they so much as uttered a word against the Nazi regime, controlled every possible aspect of life, and committed the genocide of millions of Jewish people for a very, very racist reason. Yeah, still a bad guy. Fast forward another few years, and Hitler is running wild all over Europe, seizing Austria and Sudetenland, and breaking tons of other conditions of the Treaty of Versailles. But the World Police Force, aka the League of Nations, had no real power to stop him. Eventually, Britain and France had enough of Hitler's shenanigans, and in 1939, Britain and France were forced to declare war on Germany after Hitler invaded Poland. This would mark the beginning of World War II. Or it could have started in 1937 with the Japanese invasion of Nanjing, or in 1935 with the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, or, well, it depends on who you ask, but you get the idea. Now that you know a little bit about World War II, we can start talking about the technology. Both World Wars led to quite a bit of technological development. In World War I, we saw submarines, poison gas, airplanes, and more. In World War II, we would see even more awesome, cool tools of destruction that would kill many, many people, or... Actually, I guess that's not very cool. But there are also some things that save lives, like medicine. Technological advancement of war doesn't always mean making the bigger gun or the bigger bomb. It can include some less violent advancements. Not only do you have to worry about killing the enemy, you also have to make sure your army doesn't die. Before effective medical treatment was around, injury and disease, both on and off the battlefield, entailed death more often than not. Even after surgery, wounds tended to become infected and kill you anyways, and open wounds often festered and killed you anyways, and just ew. Thankfully, during the war, our good friend penicillin showed up and saved tons of lives of injured soldiers. The medicine penicillin was discovered by Mr. Alexander Fleming, who left some petri dishes full of bacteria on his desk for a while, and came back to find that a fungus had grown in one of the dishes and killed the bacteria. He named the fungus penicillin and published his findings in 1929, 10 years before the war. When the war came around, the demand for the powerful little fungus was incredible. Fleming partnered with Howard Florey, who mass-produced the stuff for the Allied powers. Penicillin was great at preventing the infection of a wound. Often it took too long for a doctor to be able to operate on a wounded soldier, and the wound would become infected during that time. It was also an effective combatant against gangrene, which is the death of body tissue, and that is really gross. I regret Googling that. On to our next topic, I'd like to talk about my favorite part of World War II. The tanks.
Wait, Mr. Ethan, weren't tanks already a thing during World War I?
Yes, they were indeed, but that's not to say there's never room for innovation. In the First World War, we saw tanks being used for the very first time in warfare. A tank is a massive armored vehicle on tracks with lots of guns designed to kill things while keeping its occupants safe. As already mentioned, they were first used in World War I, but they look nothing like the tanks we recognize today. The trench warfare of World War I was mostly a stalemate, and it was about time something was devised to break the ice. Stepping into the land in between trenches known as no man's land almost guaranteed your death, making you vulnerable to every machine gun, landmine, and artillery cannon in the area. The armored behemoth known as the tank was capable of pushing through no man's land with guns on the sides designed to fire into trenches they rolled over. However, the majority of tanks deployed either broke down or got stuck and were just very clumsy overall. Come World War II, and the more recognizable tank that pops into your head when you hear the word tank begins to take shape. The tanks became faster and more powerful with different types serving different purposes, and having the very iconic design of a turret mounted on the top that fires deadly shells and can swivel a full 360 degrees. There were 3 different types of tanks with key roles. The light tanks were the smallest and the fastest, possessing the least firepower, being very effective scouts in the field. Medium tanks struck a balance between the speed and maneuverability of a light tank, and the power and armor of a heavy tank, being very good at flanking or providing assistance to weakened lines. Heavy tanks were the big guns of the tanks, and tanks were already very big guns. Heavy armor and heavy firepower made them the front lines tanks that pushed close towards the enemy and crushed them with their brute force. World War II gave birth to some very iconic tanks like the Sherman, the Lee, the Tiger, the Panzer. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I played World of Tanks. Tanks were also essential to Hitler's blitzkrieg warfare, in which air forces would attack, immediately followed by ground forces, including tanks, to push the enemy back and encircle them. Anyways, the armored behemoths of World War II would fight in the biggest tank battle in history, the Battle of Kursk. On July 5th, 1943, Germany launched their attack on the Russian city Kursk, seeing it as an opportunity to secure a victory over the Soviets. German tank forces were able to push back the Soviet lines some, which led to them being overly ambitious and getting their tanks stuck in wet marshes around Kursk. The Germans could not close in on the city quickly enough, and the Soviet counterattack sent German forces running with their tails between their legs. This battle was crucial for the Soviets and stopped the Germans from launching any future offensive in the east. Since World War II, tank and armored warfare continues to progress and is one of the forefronts of the war today. Since we're on the topic of things that blow things up, why don't we talk about another thing that blows more things up, the V2 rocket. This feat of German engineering was the world's first ballistic missile, and it also came with an automatic guidance system to ensure it would never miss its mark. These German ballistic missiles, ballistic meaning that its flight path was arc-like and assisted by gravity in air, packed 900 kilograms, that's 2,000 pounds, of explosives, and a couple thousand of them were launched in attacks on London. Ironically, more people were killed building the rockets than people were killed by the rocket actually being used for its intended purpose, killing things. A couple thousand met their demise in a rocket attack, but an estimated 20,000 died building these rockets. The laborers that assembled the rockets were slaves pulled from Hitler's concentration camps, and, like always, conditions for these laborers were beyond awful. Many of them were executed as well due to attempted sabotage. However, the more important and lasting impact these rockets had is that they paved the way for the space age. The V2 rocket was such a breakthrough that the German engineer Wernher von Braun, who designed the rockets, was employed by the US after the war and tackled some very important projects that would change history. Most notably, Braun assisted in the development of the Saturn V rocket, and that's the one that took a couple of dudes and put them on a little rock called the Moon. Thanks to the sacrifices of war, we were able to do some pretty cool stuff when it came to space-age technology. So, the very last exploding machine we'll be talking about, and I promise it's the last one, is the nuke. Now, I'm sure you're already aware of what a nuclear warhead is, but where did it come from? In an effort to beat the Nazis in the race to develop nuclear weapons, the US assembled the Manhattan Project, a large team of scientists dedicated to the atomic bomb, which included some famous names such as Albert Einstein. But it turns out that Germany never even finished their atomic bombs, and the US would end up using 2 of their nuclear warheads on Japan. You see, Japan had launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1944, which forced the US to declare war on Japan and pulled them into the entire scene of the war. A year later, the war between the US and Japan continues, and Japan refuses to surrender. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped the very first warhead ever to be used in war, nicknamed Little Boy. The bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, and then another, nicknamed Fat Man, on Nagasaki 3 days later. Unlike the V2 rocket, what's most important is the outcome of the destruction, rather than the technology. The two nukes dropped in 1945 would be the first and the last nukes to be used in war for a very good reason. In Hiroshima, an estimated 200,000 died as a direct result of the explosion, and 237,000 from the after effects, including, but not limited to, radiation poisoning, burns, and cancer. Thankfully, the second bomb was not as destructive as the first, but that's not to say it wasn't a tragedy as well. Another 40 to 75,000 died from the explosion, and the total death count eventually reached 80,000. To help visualize the terrible destruction of the bombings, here's a quote from a professor who witnessed the aftermath of Hiroshima. "I climbed Hikiyama Hill and looked down. I saw that Hiroshima had disappeared. I simply can't express what I felt. Hiroshima just didn't exist." Looking back, Hiroshima and Nagasaki serve as reminders of the destructive power of nuclear weapons, something now in the hands of multiple countries. Even today, the debate still continues whether or not the bombings of Japan in 1945 were even necessary. Our very last topic of the day, I am so excited to talk to you all about radar. That's right, radar. Yes, radar. So anyways, radar was invented in 1918, and that's when the Germans were testing their... Oh. Hello.
That's entirely wrong. Where'd you even learn that information?
What do you mean it's wrong? All my sources are, credible.
First page of your Google search isn't always credible. How much research did you even do?
I took the notes here, man. I put all the stuff down. I guess there's stuff.
Get out now! You don't know anything! Get out!
Oh my god!
I'm your new and improved host, Patrick Lee, here to replace my incompetent colleague and inform you all about radar.
Radio detection and ranging, as known as radar, was something both the Allied powers and the Axis powers invented independently from each other in the mid-1930s. What radar does is it bounces many sound waves off of an object to determine where the object is and where it's going. One of its first uses was to detect enemy aircraft. This allowed the side under attack to foresee attacks much earlier than without radar and allowed them to prepare to defend themselves. Offensively, radar was more than just useful. It guided bombs and missiles towards their targets and was used by meteorologists to track the weather in order to plan military operations. Radar can be used underwater as well. In World War I, German submarine warfare was very difficult to fight because you couldn't detect the submarines. Whatever your eyes couldn't catch couldn't be caught at all. However, radar could detect enemy submarines, which prevented them from sneaking up on you.
Of course, a tool like radar is useful for more than just war. Today, radar is used for air traffic control, for satellite navigation, for underwater exploration, for meteorology, and navigation, just to name a few. Next time you get lost and who knows where and you need to pull up your GPS app, you can thank World War II for the technology that keeps you from getting lost in the middle of nowhere.
Now it's time for the thought bubble. Let's recap everything that we've learned today.
Because penicillin was just that good, 2.3 million doses were manufactured just for D-Day. It has saved millions of lives over the course of the past 70 years, and at some point, 646 billion doses were being manufactured annually. In a way, penicillin was like a little army in itself, fighting off bacteria and heroically saving lives. Good job, little fungi.
First, we introduced you to World War II to help you understand a little bit of what's going on. Then, we talked about penicillin, the powerful breakthrough medicine largely used in World War II that saved countless wounded soldiers from death. The bulldozer of the battlefield, the tank, has evolved between World War I and World War II and is an amazingly powerful tool of war that will steamroll anything in its path. The V-2 rocket is a German ballistic missile that led to the beginning of the space age. We sent human beings into space and even put them on the moon. The nuke was a wartime invention with the power to obliterate entire populations. Hiroshima and Nagasaki continue to serve as reminders of what nuclear weapons can do, and how dangerous they can be in the wrong hands. Lastly, radar is a very important tool for navigation, exploration, and monitoring. Radar is essential in tons of applications today, from satellite GPS to mapping the ocean floor.
Hi, I'm Ethan, your lead writer. To my right is Aditya, our editor and filmer. To my left is Harshita, your producer. And behind me is Patrick, our director.
This has been a very special production of Smash Course World History.
We hope you enjoyed the video.
Please like, share, and subscribe.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
watching.
watching.